Halo Combat Evolved is one of the most influential and well-respected games of all time to me. It started the long-running Halo series, and it's time that I finally speak about the series that has influenced my taste in games more than any other, and show how the first game set a blueprint for the series to follow. A lot of the game's core mechanics originated here and have mostly stuck around with some alterations, improvements, and additions with each new release. Every game in the series has the same building blocks with a 2-weapon limit, some form of regenerating health, whether it be a shield and health or only shield, a radar that shows the location of nearby enemies, the different enemy factions, and a lot of the ways that combat will handle. One of the more unique mechanics for the first-person shooter genre is that Halo doesn't depend on aim-down sights, and actually discourages it quite a bit, with the exception being Halo 4. There are few guns that have aim-down sights, and when you are aiming, taking any kind of damage will reset you back to hip firing. This should signify that you shouldn't rely on aiming down sights and instead take advantage of the more accurate hip firing. In most modern shooters, hip firing is inaccurate and unstable. That's not the way it is in Halo. You are allowed to move and shoot with no penalty to your accuracy. Like, I can keep going on all the little ways the games are similar, but let's move on to something more substantial: the enemies. One of the biggest successes of the Halo franchise is the enemy design. The original trilogy of games had two main factions of enemies: the Covenant, a collection of aliens of different races, and the Flood, a swarm-like hive mind of enemies that will search for anything to eat. There are many things that make these enemies great. One is how good the overall silhouettes are for them. You can tell who you are fighting at an instant. The variety of enemies is excellent, with each enemy having its own properties you'll have to think about. Like elites and jackals both use shields, but different kinds. Elites have a personal shield around them, while jackals have a large handheld shield that will need to be taken out, flanked, or shot through in a small opening. And let me tell you how to fight the Flood. Don't. You need to run. Run for your life. The Flood comes in 3 forms. These, I don't remember their names, so I'll call these the Popcorn, and these the Bag, and then the Infected. The Flood have one main form of attack: charging at you and overwhelming you with superior numbers. The Covenant uses more traditional tactics with flanking and such. The Flood do not give a fuck. They have no self-preservation, their body is their weapon, they just want to fuck you up however they can. So close range weapons like the shotgun are almost a necessity while fighting them. Going back to the Covenant, the Grunt's only defining feature is how they can become panicked if an elite near them is killed. Other than that, they are pretty weak fodder enemies. And finally, the Hunters. They are heavily armored tank-like enemies with a small opening on their back, which is their weak point. These guys always come in packs of 2, so if you see one, you know another is around. And these guys can provide a bit of a challenge because they have more health and less openings for damage. One thing that has been expanded upon in the sequels is how the enemies come in different variances as well. Elites do this in Combat Evolved by not only having the base form, but invisible ones, some that have energy swords, and some that are both. The Infected Flood can carry weapons, which causes some issues I'll get to later. The other enemies remain static throughout, which isn't bad. I do like how the elites can change, but still have the same basic properties and need to be dealt with differently. An invisible elite might flank you and catch you off guard, but I found these to be slightly weaker than standard elites. Those with swords are incredibly dangerous up close, but pose no threat at a distance, but are given a stronger shield in order to compensate. And these variants are visually distinct. It's easy to tell the zealots from the standard elites. To show contrast, take something like Call of Duty. How do you deal with every enemy? You shoot them in the head. You don't have to think about them in any capacity. Every enemy is nearly identical. Halo has enemies with various properties that differ in the ways they need to be dealt with, which leads us into weapons. Unlike, let's pick a random shooter, Borderlands, where they have millions of weapons but with a ton of redundancy, Halo has a focused selection of guns, all of which have uses in situations where they become effective with differences between them. The Covenant and UNSC use contrasting weapons since the Covenant adopts battery-based weapons that can overheat, with the exception being the Needler. And once the weapon is empty, they become useless with no way to recharge them. The Covenant plasma pistols are great against shielded enemies. The UNSC pistol and other precision-based weapons are great against weaker enemies, as a single headshot is enough to kill them. As I mentioned earlier, the Flood like getting up close and personal, which makes the shotgun ideal. I don't want to make it sound like every enemy has one way of dealing with them. There are some tactics that are more useful than others. You can kill shielded enemies with weapons besides the plasma pistol. The plasma rifles are almost as effective, and the assault rifle can be used as well, and the assault rifle can take out smaller enemies quickly. I don't think any of these weapons are strictly useless or situational. It's a scenario that you are in that will have the weapons shine or be ineffective. With only 2 weapons on you at any time, the ones you choose are important. You must be prepared for whoever you are fighting, or be ready to switch things up on the fly. The games do a great job of using all of these enemies to create challenging and varied encounters. Since they all have easy to learn features, it remains fair as you can predict how each enemy will act. And since the 2 factions oppose each other, the devs can create a 3-way battle with you, the Covenant, and the Flood. So to recap, a ton of the enemy designs and properties originated here. The weapons have changed a lot, but most of the Covenant weapons stick to the battery-based design, and the UNSC weapons stick to the standard weaponry found in most shooters. Because how I see the Halo series is as the bridge between old and new school shooters. Halo shares a lot of mechanics from new shooters with its health and 2 weapon limit. It uses some older shooter wisdom with its varied bunch of enemies, and some modern tropes like aim down sights have not been rejected, but discouraged. The realistic movement of other shooters isn't here, as you can't sprint, but do move a bit faster to compensate, but not fast enough to be fully reminiscent of Doom, and you have hops for days. You also have better lateral movement than most newer FPSs, where they only have quick forward movement. Older shooters didn't have in-depth stories usually, where Halo has this massive universe of extended lore with a ton of history to discover. Regenerating health makes sense when you can't reliably dodge all incoming damage, and this allows more focus on the current smaller battle rather than worrying about health over the long term. But since Combat Evolved had a regenerating shield and non-regenerating health, there's a mix of short and long term. Halo is its own beast in my eyes, and what has made it hold up is some of its embracement and rejection of old and new ideologies. But this first attempt isn't all peachy. There are areas where they didn't quite get things right, and the first game shows its age. The last aspect of combat I haven't mentioned is vehicle combat. The 2 factions show differences here as well, not only visually but mechanically, but I don't want to get into that. I mostly want to discuss how bland the vehicle combat is. Like, I get that tanks will move slowly, but ghosts are known, at least to me, to be these badass fast vehicles that are smaller and incredibly agile. But that's not what they are here. They are slow as fuck. They don't even have a boost. And vehicle hijacking hasn't been introduced yet, which limits the ways you can attack these vehicles and the way you'll be using them. Driving up close to an elite carries no risk, as they can't easily rip you out of your vehicle. This goes for them as well, since closing the distance on them doesn't provide you with a new avenue of attack. Overall, I think the vehicles in Combat Evolved are the clunkiest and slowest of the series, and fighting these large scale battles with vehicles, which usually do provide some of the most memorable fights, end up feeling like a slog. And then there's the level design. So many goddamn similar looking corridors and levels. The library is probably the guiltiest level of them all, since every room looks the same. The same fucking hallway copy and pasted across multiple floors. The same objective of running through the flood and then having to wait in a tiny room and fight them off. By the end, it just felt like it needed more variety. And a couple of levels just have you revisit previous ones in reverse. But to the game's credit, they do it after the flood have shown up, so it's not like you're fighting the same encounters again. The final level does tie the game together nicely, since you start and end the game on the Pillar of Autumn, and you can revisit the ship, taking in all the damage while recognizing how it looked before. This is the one time I think it works well, but the other instances don't have that kind of emotional impact. They're just the same level, the same corridors that you've seen before, and they weren't all that special the first time. And I still find it weird that during the mission Halo, they give you multiple objectives you can complete in any order, and the Silent Cartographer allows you to do things out of order. But other than that, every mission is a linear gauntlet which you put on the only path available to you. I don't have a problem with linearity, it's just odd that they would do that, and I think that's why those levels stand out the most. I do have an issue with the game's health system. Reach did bring back this system, but with a small but impactful change. Your health will regen slightly to one of 3 stages: low, mid, and fully. so there won't be a moment where you have next to no health once your shield is gone. This could mess up the difficulty curve, as someone that starts off an encounter with low health will have a more difficult time than someone at full health, which is the risk games take with not regenerating health. I feel like that small change that Reach made by having some health regen gives it an edge. Also the fact that these health kits are spread throughout the level. They won't spawn in different locations or change in any way. This means there is no dynamic health system that will help you when you are close to death, and you can go long stretches while at low health. And lastly, a few of the enemies. Remember how I said the hunters provide a decent challenge? That's only if you don't use a pistol. Look, I love this pistol as much as the next Spartan, but it breaks the encounters with the hunters, as a single shot to their back is enough to kill them. The Flood I think are interesting but aren't fun to fight. Their swarm-like aggressive nature brings a nice change of pace to the more defensive and passive Covenant, but I think they are just exhausting to fight. There's always a ton of them, and by the end I just get annoyed how they just keep coming. They just don't stop, and it's tiring and excessive. They're like a Bukkake cum shot on an infinite loop. They just don't stop coming, and I don't want the Flood to return. They were there for a few games. It was good. Make a different replacement, bring back the brutes. I don't want to see the Flood again. Also, to whoever decided to give the Flood rocket launchers, fuck you. Seriously, I don't know why I did to deserve this shit, but it's not acceptable. Let me explain why. The rockets are one-hit kills, it's nearly impossible to dodge, and is worse in some of the more cramped locations. You can't easily tell what weapon they're carrying, and all this does is cause a ton of trial and error. You have to be prepared for them and know when and where they will spawn so you can kill them before they kill you. If you don't know where they are, you will die and have to try again. I don't think this is a difficulty issue, since it's based on knowledge instead of skill. Killing them is fairly easy, it's just the fact that you don't know where they are until you die to them. And that's why I think they are bullshit, and whoever made them is a little bitch. Sorry, that was a little mean. Let's bring it back to the good though. The aesthetic of the series is fantastic. I love the way that the Covenant ships and enemies look. The Flood are creepy and unnerving, a mix of zombies, the Thing, and parasites, and just have a good horror element to them. Some of the darker areas help sell the atmosphere, and it's a shame the remaster thought this was something that needed to be fixed instead of preserved. And I have yet to talk about the sticky grenades. Since my friends know that these are a personal favorite of mine, and are really enjoyable to use. As the name suggests, they stick to enemies and are just hilarious. There are some missions that are so-so, but I've finished this game many times and still enjoy myself. And there is something about the melee attacks that I find to be extremely satisfying. Just look at the pistol flip, or the way you switch hands and deck the enemy while holding the plasma pistol. Just super satisfying. There is a reason why Halo got to be as popular as it is, and that's because it's great and better than many games in this genre. So that's Combat Evolved. A lot of what was introduced here isn't perfect, but it does a good job of crafting the series' identity. It laid the groundwork for the series to continue off of and iterate upon. The first still holds up and is worth playing for those who never had a chance before. That'll be all for me. This is a part 1 of sorts, as I will be showing the ways this series has changed over the years. Thank you very much for watching. If you made it this far, I'll assume you liked the video. Don't lie, you know you did. So like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Halo God out.